If you listen to the show, you already know that we cannot exist without our sponsors. They are the ones who make things happen behind the scenes. So let's acknowledge Fuji Sports. We've been working with these guys for a while now, not only as far as this podcast is concerned, but also at the RŌL Academy. We've had their gear. I personally use their gis. What a phenomenal product.
Yeah, I mean, jiu-jitsu, judo, MMA, tape, bags, anything you need for your jiu-jitsu journey, you can find at fujisports.com.
Let's talk RŌL TV. There's so much content on there. It's ridiculous at this point. But I think what is even more intriguing, as time went on during the project, we've been recording most of the events that were taking place here at RŌL Academy. At this point, I mean, we have guys like Chris Howder, Armin Fati, Rafael Lovato Sr., and Pete the Greek. I mean, there are so many different events that we've kind of recorded it. Don't you think that's amazing? I mean, points of reflection and kind of going back for all the students to see what really happened and refresh their memory.
Yeah, I think it's great, you know, being able to go back and look at all these high-level practitioners, Octavio Cudo, like one of the names you didn't mention. And I mean, just these guys that have been doing this for so long come in, teach these amazing seminars and workshops, and it's all recorded and there for you to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to get additional savings on all this, type in code RŌL Radio at the coupon and get additional 30% off of your membership.
Nice. Go to rolacademy.tv. What's up, everyone, and welcome back. If you haven't already, please remember to hit the like, share, subscribe, download, listen, and whatever other button there is, and leave us a review wherever you do listen. That ensures that we can continue bringing you the great guests and amazing content that you have come to expect. Today's guest was never very active in sports and started jiu-jitsu a little later than most. Many people would think a person like that might not succeed in a room with some of the biggest names in jiu-jitsu and future legends of MMA. Brian Glick joins us to discuss how a martial art can make a fundamental change in a person's life, the physical and mental challenges of jiu-jitsu, and how he succeeded training in the Renzo Basement with the best in the world. Here's the RŌL Radio with the owner and head instructor at Brooklyn BJJ, a John Danaher and Renzo Gracie black belt, and the man who John Danaher said was the small guy who could twist monsters into pretzels, Brian Glick.
Welcome to RŌL Radio.
And we are live. And once again, we are here.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
I'm good. Well, I missed the last one. I wasn't here, so I feel like you miss a week and you feel really out of place.
I had to run solo. It was a great conversation, but you know, people can see, but I put a big monitor in front of me, and now I cannot see you directly. I figured you would get kicked out of it.
Appreciate it very much. Yeah, the big black box.
Great.
That's between us.
Great. Great.
I'm good.
Well, welcome back to the show, Gary. I'm glad you're here, so I don't have to run everything by myself. But it's always good to have these conversations. And today, it's in my mind, this is going to be a great conversation. We have Brian Blake on the show. First of all, sir, thank you for being here. Thank you for giving us this hour, this your time and your busy schedule to have this conversation with us.
That's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
So some of the things that we see online, first of all, you are very involved and very visible and contributor to jiu-jitsu community with the skills and you know, the thought of jiu-jitsu as you're putting it together in your mind, you know, but it appears to me as you are very kind of relaxed and as life is good in a sense. At least that's the perception that I'm getting. Is there a lot of truth behind that?
I mean, I don't know necessarily that my life is any easier than anyone else's, but I do think that, you know, I was talking about this with someone because I was fortunate enough to visit a friend for a seminar down in Georgia last weekend. And we really do have a pretty good setup, you know, those of us who are in a life of martial arts. You know, I talk about this with the friends that I'm close with, but we have this opportunity to show up and we get to do this thing that we really like to do. And we're involved in something that we care a lot about. And we're if you look around, there are plenty of people for whom that's not the case. And I think that, if you have an opportunity to do what you like to do or do what you love to do, and it happens to be jujitsu, there are a lot of worse ways of doing it, man. You could have a lot of other jobs, and I'm just grateful. I think most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, I'm pretty grateful that this is the life that I get to lead. And it has all of the normal challenges and vicissitudes. It's got relationships that work and some that don't work. It's got days that are better and days that are worse. But at the end of the day, I think it's useful, especially for me, to do a little check in every once in a while. I go, hey, you know what? Like, I could really be doing a lot of other things. And I'm just grateful not to be doing that stuff mostly. So yeah, I feel pretty good.
I was just telling somebody on a similar topic, one of my students, and I was telling them I feel like I'm a lucky cat. Like there is something extraordinary about doing what we do, being involved in this beautiful art, but also making impact on other people and really, in some ways, changing the life. And as cliche as it sounds, like I get it, but there is an impact that we are making, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there's something, one of the things that I think people derive a lot of meaning from, especially as they move into a more mature phase of life, like late 30s, 40s, 50s, beyond, is that feeling of having a connection to other people, having connection to a group of other people, and then knowing that what you're doing with your time, with your energy, with your efforts, it makes a difference for people. Like it improves the way that they are engaging with, on a small scale, it improves improves the way that people are engaging with jiu-jitsu. But then beyond that, in a lot of cases, as with, probably the three of us, that relates directly to how you interact with the other people in your life, how, what kind of relationships you have, and how you solve problems, and how you approach things that go well for you and how you approach things that don't. And there are plenty of people that I know who go through their lives and they have on paper, it's a very successful kind of life, that they've got a roof over their heads, and a lot of times it's a really nice roof, and they've got plenty to eat, and they've got a nice car, but there is that thing that's missing. And I think that for a lot of people, it's about having like having an impact on people, or making a difference in a way where someone goes, oh, you know what, like, I didn't think about this in this way before. Or someone says, hey, the way that you explain something really makes sense to me, and I've heard the same thing from other people, but it hasn't really landed in the same way. And I think that that's a very rewarding thing, and it's a meaningful thing, and it makes what we do, it gives it more depth. It's like, okay, how much enjoyment can you get out of doing the arm lock, or teaching the arm lock? There's a ceiling to that.
Yeah.
But when you really are kind of leveraging that in a way so that people have a different experience of the other things in their life, then it starts to feel like it's much more meaningful, I think.
Let's dig into this a little bit more, if you don't mind. I mean, how is this possible that a simple thing like a martial art can make such a fundamental impact on somebody else, and oftentimes completely change the direction of their life? I mean, how many times you've seen your students coming in with an objective of whatever it might be, but a year, 2, 5, maybe even longer later, they are a completely different human.
I think that there is a sense in which jiu-jitsu is a very appropriate vehicle for people to learn lessons that they can't learn in other parts of their lives. I know that for a while, and maybe even now, it's become a jiu-jitsu cliche, jiu-jitsu is for everyone.
Mhm.
And I think that, and we can talk about this too, but while I think that jiu-jitsu should be available for everyone, I don't necessarily think jiu-jitsu is for everyone. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that for some people, the vehicle is different. For some people, the vehicle is basketball. For some people, the vehicle is music. For some people, the vehicle is, painting or chess. And but these things kind of converge at a certain point. You learn lessons, or you learn you're understanding more both about yourself and your relationship to other people around you, your place in the world. You're learning that because you're in this vehicle. You kind of get in a car, and that thing that you're in, that vehicle, helps to get you from where you are to some other point. And so I think that for a lot of people right now, jiu-jitsu is a very useful and functional vehicle. And there are a few reasons for that as I see it. And these are not the only reasons. This is just my opinion. But, I think that number one, you have an opportunity to do some pretty hard things. And now hard things are different for everybody. I think that there is a sense when you say people doing hard things, there's a sense of okay, well, we're going to go into the weight room, and we're going to, put a couple extra chips on the bar, and we're really going to go for it. That's for sure. That's a hard thing. But, for some people, sitting still is a hard thing. For other people, being active is a hard thing. And I think that what jiu-jitsu challenges you to do is kind of do hard stuff, and it meets you where you are. So if the thing that's hard for you is showing up to class and having someone expecting you to show up to class, and you do it, that's a hard thing. That's something to step over. And when you start to do that, and you start to do, it kind of chains to other hard things. For other people, the physical training is the thing that makes the biggest difference. The hard thing is being on the bottom of the mount with someone who is, 50 pounds heavier than you. And you don't, are you going to get out before the time goes? Or are you going to get out without getting submitted? It's psychologically, physically, physiologically, that's the hard thing. So I think that jiu-jitsu is challenging in this sense, in this kind of deeply resonant sense for people, where it's I'm going to show up and I'm going to do this thing that's hard. And we have, those of us, especially those of us who participate, but even new people coming in, have a sense that there is something intrinsically hard about jiu-jitsu, especially at the beginning. You're dealing with someone who's resisting you. And a lot of the challenges and struggles and stresses and anxieties and frustrations and anger that we have in the course of our lives come because we encounter this resistance. We encounter resistance from other people, or we encounter resistance from circumstances. And I do feel if you're showing up to a place that, by the way, you're volunteering to show up to, no one's mandating it. It's not a requirement. It's not the state is saying you need to come in. It's not your boss is saying you've got to come in. It's a kind of intrinsically driven thing. You're showing up, and you're willingly putting yourself into a circumstance where, you could get physically injured. I mean, hopefully you're training in an environment where that's mitigated a little bit, but you could get physically injured. But the likelihood is you're probably going to get psychologically injured, in the process.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be you're going to feel insulted, or you're going to feel like you suck, or you're going to feel and then kind of you go through that, you emerge on the other side of it, even if it's just a class, even if it's just for 1 hour, you're kind of emerging on the other side of that process. And then you kind of get ejected, out of a spaceship into in an escape pod. You kind of get ejected back into the rest of your life. And you carry that experience with you. I think that for a lot of people, that is it can be very transformative. And I think that word's overused, but I do think it can kind of kickstart this vision that how you are is not necessarily how you need to be forever, that you're changing as you're changing, hopefully you're evolving. So you kind of are letting go of some of this like fixed identity stuff. Um, and then like ultimately you're accessing this thing that a lot of other people that are probably around you are really running from. They're not digging into the hard stuff. And not in this way, in any case. And so I think that when you engage in this experience of jiu-jitsu, like, yes, you're getting fitter, yes, you're getting stronger, yes, you're gaining these other skills and you self-defense and you know how to fight, all that. But on some deeper level, even if it's not totally articulated, people have a feeling after they've done this, they're like, this is hard. And I did it and I made it through it. And then guess what? Like this time tomorrow, I'm going to be doing it again. And I think that like building that habit is not just rewarding on like a kind of satisfying a desire level, but it's rewarding on the sense that like you feel like you're not afraid to grow and develop as a person. And that is another level, I think, of reward for people. So I think that's like a big reason that people are drawn to this, and it's so powerful for so many people.
You mentioned mental challenge, you mentioned physical challenge, which both of them are very visible on jiu-jitsu mat. Which one do you think that students struggle more with? Which one is the bigger obstacle here? I feel like one of them is the obvious one, right? There is a physical conflict between two bodies taking place, and often that one is considered as the obvious one. We are engaging, right? But I think the underestimated one is the mental chess of the puzzle, right? And that's what jiu-jitsu often is referred to. Which one do you think that most people struggle with? Like, where is that bigger conflict take place?
I think it changes, throughout, like depending on where you are in the process, like in the study and in the journey of jiu-jitsu. Because I think, if you look at somebody who is, say they're in like a jiu-jitsu school and they're on the bench and they're watching, or they're in the waiting area, the gap between the waiting area, like being in the waiting area and being on the mat, is not a physical gap, it's a psychological gap. And so when you first begin, like if you take someone who's never done jiu-jitsu and someone who has done jiu-jitsu, like that's the gap. It's more psychological. And so what does it take for somebody to get out of the waiting area, like the lobby where they're watching, and step onto the mat? I think that's psychological. I think once you're on the mat in your first class, especially during that initial white belt phase of training, it's also physical. I mean, you're trying to do well. I think if you have good preparation and you have a good instructor, you have like you're going to have a sense that you don't know technically, like you don't have technical solutions for problems that people who have been training for a while are giving to you. So like there is a physical thing, like there's physical discomfort, like someone's got their hand in your collar and you don't really know what to do. So, there's like physical pressure. I think as time goes by, you start to gain some skills. You're learning new things, how your hip is supposed to move, where you're supposed to put your hands, like what does a threat look like? What's a physical threat look like? And so then you start to gain a sense of confidence. People gain a sense of confidence and at least being oriented to what the problem is and what's danger and where am I supposed to be. And I think that in a phase like that, it's like kind of psychologically, you're a little more confident. You know a little more about what you're supposed to be doing. But there's always that skill gap where physically you are under pressure. And I think that what ends up happening is, in my experience, is this cycle kind of, maybe it's not cycle, but it's kind of like this wave. Where at certain phases of your training, your psychology is more important. And then at certain phases of your training, your physical experience is more important. Sometimes that is even in one, you can go through that wave in a single class where like, physically you're feeling great while you're at the beginning of the class. And then by round 7 or 8 of a sparring session, now you're in a place where, because you're completely physically depleted and you're not able to access your strength or your speed or your power, psychologically you start to feel depleted as well. And so it goes between the two. But really, I think like at this level, for me, because, and I think that you guys probably have this, you get to like a certain point and you have some bumps and bruises from over the years. Your body is recovering at a different rate than it used to. If you're 45, you're not recovering at the same rate as when you were 25. And so you need to make adjustments. And I think that we're always kind of managing physical stress and physical difficulty. So psychologically, sometimes you feel a little more pressure because, you kind of understand what the circumstances are physically. So I know that's not like a clear answer, but I do think that we experience both of these things at different phases of training in our careers, like in our life cycle. And then also we experience these things differently depending on where we are, just even like day to day or week to week.
Well, it's a great point of conversation, because I think most people who come into jiu-jitsu for very first time, especially those who don't know what jiu-jitsu is, or they're just exploring it, their perception oftentimes is that physical conflict. Like, how do I deal with these people being on top of me? How do I escape? How do I get out of it? What do I do here? Right. But that mental approach to all of this is often underestimated. Right.
Yes.
There is a logic behind all of this, and we have to make decisions. We can show techniques and strategies and how to solve problems, but if we don't make decisions, none of this is happening. Like, and I feel like oftentimes this is really underestimated part of it.
Yes, I think that's true. I think that I can speak for myself and the channel through which I learned jiu-jitsu. My instructor was always the focus was on developing a systematic approach to whatever the circumstances were. If it was the guard, if it was someone on your back, if you were on someone's back, if you're attacking the arm lock, it was about developing a system that was like optimized so that when it comes to making decisions like the way you're talking about, we have a framework to do that. And it was always the case that we would, and I'm very, I think the only real reason that I was able to survive the early years of jiu-jitsu in the environment that I was in was because of this approach. Because I think that if you have a kind of attribute-based approach to jiu-jitsu, which is to say, you need to be flexible, or you need to be fast, or you need to be strong, or you need to be a certain height, or you need to be a certain speed, or whatever, that those things tend to be exclusive of people who don't have those attributes, and so the idea that you could have a system that guides your decisions rather than a set of attributes that allows you to perform or behave in a certain way, I think those are two different approaches. Now, they're not black and white. There are some things about, if you have attributes, and if you're stronger than I am, you should use your strength. You shouldn't rely on it, but you should be able to use it. And if I'm more flexible than you, then I should have an understanding of how to use the flexibility, but I don't really want to be relying on it. And when it comes to decisions and decision making, I think that like as you pointed out accurately, a lot of what we do is about decision making. And that's the way I think that bringing that to the fore, like having that be explicit instead of just implicit, where we're making decisions based on like our intuition, or we're making decisions based on circumstances. I think that having an approach that's a little bit more direct and explicit means that you can learn and adjust like more readily. And then significantly for people like us, I think it means that you can teach other people how to make these decisions. And so like it's a more transferable experience.
Well, and then I would imagine that if we put these attributes aside and really think about troubleshooting and making decisions, that's a more of a long-term solution.
Right.
As we get older, there is no secret that some of these attributes at least change, if not
Right.
disappear, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah. 100%. And I think you can see this, and if you go back and you look at um, people in any arena, really, it doesn't necessarily need to be jujitsu, but you can see it in jujitsu. People whose uh, approaches or practices or tournament careers were exclusively physical, you know, like exclusively. I mean, everybody's thinking everyone's, even if you're not kind of conscious of it, you're still making strategic choices and that sort of thing. But like where it's more attribute based, when those attributes disappear, you're often left feeling like there's this big void because you're so reliant on your physicality. And again, my teacher was not a physically, gifted person. And so I think, he had this bum hip and he had this bum knee, and like he had these kind of, in some ways, like limitations. And as a result of that, I think he was able to craft like a view of jujitsu, like an approach to jujitsu that took into account the fact that, hey, like maybe you're not going to have all of the attributes of like a winning athlete, and certainly, as you point out, even people who have attributes of winning athletes, that stuff doesn't stay. Everything changes, and most things, at least like, physically, eventually degrade. So what we have control over are skills. We have control over decisions we make, and we have control over like what we prioritize. So if you can make good decisions and have strong skills and prioritize well, then you're going to have a pretty good shot, as far as I can see, of being able to have a jiu-jitsu practice that's 20 or 30 or 40 years long, because it's more sustainable, it's more reliable for you. Yeah.
I'll throw a curveball into this conversation
Sure.
a little bit. Do you think that's the way the majority people think who come into jiu-jitsu?
I think people have different goals, when they come in, and I think some of it also depends a little bit on the age and stage at which someone starts training. Um, and also it's very different, from how it used to be. I think that when I first began jiu-jitsu, I think that there was a different kind of like sensibility about what you were trying to accomplish, like what your goals were. There were some tournaments, but they were very few and far between. ADCC was a thing, but it was a very, very niche event. It was really just for the people of Abu Dhabi, just the sheiks were there, watching this thing. And when you look at the awareness of the new student coming into jiu-jitsu, or even people who have just been practicing for a year or two, there is this whole culture and this whole structure around what your goals could be or what your goals should be. So I think when people begin, I mean, and look, and I'll also say this, I think that like, even for me and Thomas, like you can answer, Gary, you guys can answer this question for like what it was like when you started, but the actual thing I think that brings most people into jiu-jitsu is like, they want to know how to defend themselves. Like they want to be able to fight someone off if they're being attacked. And occasionally, I guess you probably have people who have seen it as like a sport, and they're like, oh, this is maybe a sport that I want to do. But it is a martial art. So there is that sense of like doing something to build self-reliance, doing something to build your ability to defend yourself or other people. So I think that like in terms of what people's goals are for showing up, and mine included, like, I didn't show up thinking I was going to do jiu-jitsu for 20 years. Like, I showed up so that I didn't get my ass kicked when I was riding the subway on the way home. That was that was like a real urgent, pressing need that I had, like I, and I think there are plenty of people who show up and they're like, hey, you know what? Like, either I'm afraid I'm going to get my ass kicked, or I'd like to stop. I'm already getting my ass kicked. I want it to stop. And then you get this other kind of group also where they're like, and this is the other side, is there are people who are like, I'm already kicking people's asses, but I want to do it better. And I think that's
too.
like, yeah. So like that's, you kind of fall into these two categories. It's like, either you're showing up because you're being bullied in some way, or you're showing up because you're a bully and you want to do your job better. And I think that one of the things, my teacher said this to me like really early on. He said, jiu-jitsu is really good for like strengthening the weak and then civilizing the bully. So I think that when people show up, they're either intending to bully more, and hopefully in the course of their training, they get civilized out of that. Although, it's debatable whether that's happening. And I think the other thing is probably for more people, it's like, hey, I want to go from being this person who's, kind of feels weak, even if they're not weak, they feel weak, because you can get people who show up and they're, 215 and they're solid muscle, but still they've got, still worried they're going to get beaten up. And I think that's, and those people need help too. So I think that like when people first show up, their goal is usually more short term.
Yeah.
Which is fine. And I think to your point, about like long-term training, I don't think, I wonder also, I don't want to say I don't think, but like I wonder also if if the instructors and people who are teaching are instilling enough of a vision of long-term practice rather than like kind of a short-term.
Yeah, when you said like,
game.
The people that are in it for the short term, I didn't start till I was older. And I think you come in thinking that you're going to learn these things rapidly. You don't know what you're in store for. You really don't when you come through the door. And I had taken other martial arts, so I know the long process, I guess. And people come in not knowing that process and how long it's going to be. And to go back to what we were talking about, earlier, I think we talked about the physical and the mental. And I think that, do you think that people are ultimately prepared yet that the mental aspect of it is there's a lot of the ego aspect, which we didn't really touch on, of, this thing that I need to, that I'm starting is an endless process. It's always evolving. It's always changing. And for me to get good, whatever that means, is that I have to be in it for a really long time. Like it's not going to be, I'm not going to go from the weak, afraid of getting my ass kicked, to the strong in a couple months. It's a really long process. And do you think that, how do you stop people from feeling defeated in those early years even?
Yeah. That's a good question. It's hard to stop people from feeling defeated. I think that people can feel defeated. I think that that's actually part of the process. I think that if, you need to pass through this feeling, this like stage of feeling like it's not working. And then the question is, do you have enough of an ember still burning that you can, like, someone can help you, usually, especially in the early stages, like rekindle that or kind of keep it going so that it builds up into a fire. Because, there's no, look, this is, again, other people may have other kind of more like broader views of this, but I think that it's a buzz, it's kind of a catch phrase, in jiu-jitsu, like, I'm doing battle with my ego. I think that most people are not actually doing that. And I think that what often will happen is people will kind of push in on it a little bit, like they'll touch it, but they won't really like do meaningful work about letting it go and really kind of dropping into the experience of learning. And because they try to keep that sense of like they're being right or they're having a handle on things alive, it's like a progress inhibitor. So like actually I feel like the people who are able to kind of feel defeated and then go and do the work anyway, those are the people who tend to actually survive the process.
For
It's
sure.
the people who feel like, you know what, like I'm never going to be defeated, or I'm never going to let this thing crush me. I'm never going to. I mean, we're talking about like it's not just semantics, because I'm not saying like, people should be giving up and like leaving and stopping training. That's not what we're talking about. But I mean, there were months or years where like I would go into train and like I would still get crushed. And like sometimes with the training with people who I train with now, and like these guys can still like they still will steamroll me. And like that kind of thing about being defeated is like, is that really the measure? Because actually what we're looking for is we're looking for people to understand that this idea that you're failing at something is not really like your failure. You're Here's a good way I think of thinking about it. A lot of times when people come in for their first lesson, and maybe you had this experience, you get mounted, and then you use all of the tools that you have at whatever that time is to try to defend the mount. So if it's like your first day, what are you going to do? You're going to bench press the guy off of you. You're going to you're going to hold your breath and like strain and like push, and you're going to extend your arms, and you're going to like grab their lapels and like pull them down to you. You're going to do all of those things because those are the tools that you have. And it's not until you give up on those things that you go like, what I'm doing, like, okay, great, it's been 30 seconds and I'm completely exhausted. Nothing I've done has worked and I'm in a worse position. Like, it's not until you go like, wait a second, like, this isn't working. This is not only is it not working, but like everything I thought that I was supposed to do is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, I think that like these are like a moment like that, which gets repeated if you're doing it right. I think it gets repeated throughout your jiu-jitsu career in different guises. Maybe now it's you're getting caught in, a heel hook in 50-50, or you're getting like taken down in some way. But until you go like, everything I've tried is not working, I need to make a change if I want to survive. And as a result of that, I've got to give up on these failing strategies. Until you do that, you're not improving. And it doesn't matter if it's, Brian Glick or Joe Schmo or John Danaher or, Gordon Ryan standing in front of you telling you what to do. You have to kind of give up that thing. Like, that's all you. And so when it comes to like thinking about ego, I think that is like a practical kind of on the ground way that people can think about it. And it's in that like feeling, it's not really a loss. It's more of like a giving, like it is a giving up though, and if we stop, if we don't like vilify or like make giving up or like kind of losing or failing, if we don't make that into like a kind of character judgment in training, I think a lot of people will stick around longer. I think they'll probably get better faster. And I think ultimately they'll be like doing a jiu-jitsu that's probably actually more closely aligned with how their heroes in jiu-jitsu are actually training and practicing. There's a lot of loss that goes on before somebody, walks out into the bright lights. I mean, there's like, if you're doing it right, you're failing a lot. And then you're just going back and going, well, that didn't work. Now we've got to make a fix. And so, Gary, I don't know if that's like too far off the point, but I think that like one way to stop, people from feeling like, I'm so disheartened is to kind of normalize the fact that, hey, like, guess what? This is how you learn everything.
Right.
The way you learn guitar is by like playing guitar like an idiot.
Right.
And then someone's like, don't do it that way.
Yeah.
And you get a little better and you get a little better. And then it's like, that's the process.
Well, in a way, this is applicable all throughout their life, right? Like our lives. Like the moment we acknowledge this vulnerable point of, I actually don't know what I'm doing, and I'm willing to accept the information from somebody who's just smarter than me. That's all it is. Yeah. Then I just might get a little bit better, right? Just oftentimes we don't allow that, and this is where we fail.
You said vulnerable, and I think vulnerability is the key. If you're unwilling to put yourself in that vulnerable position, you're stopping yourself from any type of growth.
Yeah. You're gonna have trouble. You're gonna have trouble no matter who your instructor is, no matter how often you're training. You're gonna run in. You're gonna hit a wall at a certain point.
Mm-hmm. A bit ago, you said, which caught my eye or caught my ear. You made a statement that systemized jiu-jitsu, this process, really allowed you to survive the earlier years of your training, allow you to get through those obstacles. Talk about that a little bit. Many actually don't know your story. Many know who Brian is today, and I think that's great. But there is a fascinating part at the beginning of your story, and I ask almost every single guest. Do you remember your very first day? The very first day when you stepped on the mat?
Yeah, I remember it. I mean, I remember even before my first day, coming in to inquire about lessons, So for me, I mean, when I first started, I was like somewhere between, I don't know. I mean, I had this kind of like hippie like thing going on. I don't know. Like I was kind of out there. I mean, more so even than now, but like I was like pretty far out there. And I had never done any martial arts before. I'd never done any. I didn't play sports in high school. I didn't really do sports in college. I wasn't like unathletic, but I wasn't particularly athletic. I was certainly never drawn to team sports, but I was not even really drawn to individual sports. And so, I wasn't going to the gym. I wasn't a weightlifter. I was really coming into jiu-jitsu at the suggestion, the recommendation of a friend of mine who had shown me, we had gotten into a discussion. He was visiting from California. He is a really great guy who was a martial artist practicing. He had practiced karate in California with a well-known instructor named Fumio Demura, who at the time, I don't know if he's still around, but he was kind of like a legend of karate on the West Coast. This guy was also doing Muay Thai, and this is like probably end of the 90s, so it didn't have the same kind of cult. Like people didn't have the same kind of awareness of what it was. It was still this kind of like weird thing. Like some Westerners were doing it. Raymond Deckers was around, but like not many Westerners were doing it. And then he was also doing like Kali and stick fighting, and like the Dog Brothers were around. But he was really into all this stuff. And he had shown me we were talking about it, and he had shown me like the guard, he showed me a couple of techniques, and then he said, I think there's a Gracie Jiu-Jitsu school here in Manhattan. You should try to find it. And this was before the internet, so I had to like go to the yellow pages, and like I went to the old Henzo's, and they had just moved, and so then like I was kind of doing this, like detective work, and tried to track it down, and I finally found it. And I went in having seen UFC 1 and 2. Like I think a lot of people of this period, that was one of the things. I don't know, you guys may have had a similar experience, but like, you saw Royce Gracie in UFC 1, and I was like, I don't know what this is, but it seems like it's working and it looks pretty good. And if I knew this, I would probably be harder to beat up on the subway. And then Gracie in Action, which I think is also, even to this day, really, in a way, kind of like a timeless document of, what jiu-jitsu can do. And so I had seen those things, and I went in, and I talked to this super weird guy who was behind the desk, who was this kind of like hulking guy with kind of like longish hair over his eyes. And I wanted to know, he shoved a schedule under my nose, and said, if you want to try this, come back, and there's a class. And later on I realized that was John Danaher, but at the time I was like, this is just some like weirdo who's
well, not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, this is true. Well, like a lot of people at the time in that place, if you were not a super weirdo, you were a weirdo. I mean, jiu-jitsu was a very, as you guys know, like a very niche thing. Oh, yeah. So like if you were like, normal people didn't do it, it wasn't the thing. But yeah, like I came in, so I was like, geez, I mean, I don't know, this guy just told me to come back, so I guess I'll come back. So I went back, and I didn't have a gi, and they lent me a gi, and the class was being taught by Matt Serra and Nick Serra.
Cool.
At the time, they were teaching. Yeah, I mean, what did I don't know. Matt,
you didn't know.
Matt Serra's he's always kind of been the same. Now I think he's kind of like more Matt Serra even than he was then, but he was the same, like just this very charismatic, fun, funny, engaging, welcoming guy. And I remember, and Nick Serra also at the time was like, those guys, they could not have been nicer in a way, in the context of this. It's not like, I mean, even some jiu-jitsu schools today, but like certainly back then, it wasn't like student service wasn't a thing. Wasn't that. but like you're around, you don't have to be like, you don't have to be that way to be a very welcoming, kind of encouraging teacher. And so I remember that Matt Serra taught like the helicopter arm lock. So it's like, Tomoe Nagi, you lift the guy up, and he's floating above you, and drop him down into the arm lock.
That's your first class.
That's your first class. First class. UFC legend. I mean, he wasn't a UFC legend at the time, but like, future UFC legend Matt Serra.
What year is this?
2000. So, like I walk in, and I'm like, whoa, I don't know. But I mean, I guess to my credit, I was like, I guess this is what we're doing.
Did you do it? Were you actually successful?
I don't know. I mean, thankfully, Thomas, that's something that I have blocked out. I don't know. So I can say, in all honesty, I don't know if I was successful. I'm going to go ahead and say probably not. But I tried to do it. And like, I was like, this is weird and like kind of funky, but seemed fine. So like they taught that, they probably taught something else, and then it was like, okay guys, go to RŌL. And I was sitting there, and I look around the room, and it was like, just pairs of eyes on me. Kind of like people boring through me with their eyes. And
Are you sparring that first day?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
I'm just asking.
I
The
think
life was very
yeah.
life was very different back
Mhm.
then,
It was, yeah.
and you know, I come from similar timeline, so like
Right,
I can
right.
relate to a lot of these things.
Yeah.
You know, it's 1-to-1, and it's like, what's your first sparring session feel like?
You know, I don't remember. I honestly, like, I remember, like, I think that so there were a couple of people who were blue belts at the time, and they were not the ones I remember in any case, like, they were not unfriendly. You know, it wasn't like, but it was just they were, you know, we were all kind of like this, like the technology and the understanding of the training, how you approach it was just kind of like you know,
Mm-hmm.
you remember, it's just like kind of
Oh yeah.
banging, you're just kind of
Oh yeah.
crashing into each other. Um, and so I trained with, I think, two guys who were considerably bigger than I was, you know, definitely a lot stronger and older, you know, at the time. So I was like probably 20, let's see, I was like probably 23 at the time. So, you know, these guys are probably like in their 30s, you know, mid late 30s and much stronger. And, you know, I'm sure I got my guard passed and, you know, I remember, like, I spent really the first probably 2 years on the bottom, maybe more than that, 2 or 3 years on the bottom, either in the bottom of cross side or the bottom of the mount. If I was lucky, probably bottom of like half guard, but most of the time it was in these kind of worse positions. And so I imagine that I was just kind of like, you know, underneath someone who was cross facing me and just, you know, I was dying. But then within like a couple of classes, there was there were two guys well, one guy who was, I think, he was super helpful to me was a guy named Mike Padalino, who I don't know if he's still training, but he was always I think he was a Matt Serra guy when Matt Serra opened his academies out in Long Island. He was a Long Island guy. He would come in from Long Island, and he really kind of spent a little bit of extra time with me answering questions. I think he was a blue belt at the time. I was a white belt. And so that experience was very important because I remember feeling like, oh, you can ask a question about what just happened, and there's an answer, even if it's not going to solve the entire problem for you. And so that was pretty meaningful to me. And, you know, you could always, Matt and Nick Serra were very accessible. And then after that, it was Sean Williams, John Danaher, and they were very accessible. So there was a kind of a support structure in a way in place, but you really had to go looking for it, you know.
You know, like
Yeah.
as I'm listening to you and you're dropping some of the names and like, you know, 20 years back plus, you know, all this great journey of yours begins, is like, are you comprehending what is happening around you? I mean, Sean Williams, Matt Serra, John Dan. I mean, these are just handful names, right? But like,
Yeah.
you are surrounded by literally current legends or guys who paved the path.
Yeah.
And you are learning directly from them. I mean, people would probably pay millions to be in your shoes. I mean, talk about being a lucky cat, right? I mean, right
Yeah.
place, right time. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know, was meant to be. I mean, we can analyze this million ways, but you were there.
Yeah.
Others were not, right? And
Right.
are you comprehending the magnitude of all of this? Are you at which point does this comes as like, damn, like look at these guys, right?
Yeah. Not really. I think when you're in the moment and things are happening around you, there isn't as much of a context for what's going on. You know, you're just kind of going through the
Motion.
day, or you're going through the training. And I also didn't have very much to compare it to, which I'm really actually very grateful for. So because there wasn't a gap or like a distance between me and those guys, in the sense of like, they were definitely on a pedestal. And again, I'm sure you remember, but like in 2000, 2001, if someone was a purple belt, they were like God
Oh my
tier.
God.
Like they're just
finding a blue belt was hard. A purple belt was like
Yeah.
unachievable.
Yeah. It was just so like already there was a sense of like this thing that they were doing, like they were so expert at it that it was so far out of reach. And, you know, Gary, kind of like what you were saying, you know, you kind of show up and you're, you know, that initial thing, like, you don't know how long you're going to be doing this for exactly. You don't have a sense of the timeline. You're not like, you know, and these guys who at that time, you know, had probably been training for like 3 or 4 years, maybe 4 or 5 years, something like that. So it wasn't like they'd been there for 20 years. But if you asked me then, I would be like, oh, these guys have been here for 100 years. There's no question. You know, like even if they're only 30 years old, they've definitely been here doing this for 100 years because it's just it was so inconceivable. But at the same time, it was a very relatable thing. Like, and, you know, I got to know more about the martial arts as a whole through the lens of jiu-jitsu over the last like 20, you know, almost 25 years. And I knew from what people had said that there was a sense of jiu-jitsu as being like restructuring some of the kind of traditional ways that martial arts were presented, right? Like, you know, the sensei and the student and like this kind of hierarchy and belt ranking and like all of this stuff that made up a lot of the structure of martial arts as people thought of it prior to, you know, the kind of injection of jiu-jitsu, Gracie jiu-jitsu into the process. You know, that I think I benefited in some ways from that informality because it was like, hey, you know what? Like if you had a question, like Sean Williams was going to answer it. He taught the class, you would ask it, he would answer it. You know, if they wanted to train with you and you were available and you were a good training partner, they would train with you. There wasn't this gap between, you know, between you and them quite as much. I mean, there was obviously a huge skill gap, but there wasn't like
They were
an
accessible.
enforced hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
Now with Renzo, I think it was different. You know, we were there in the morning, and in some ways, the morning class. So like the people who were the instructors for that class, that was the morning, or like morning, like afternoon. That was like the noon class, and the noon class really was like kind of at the time like second tier, like not the real class. The real class was the class at night. That was where all of the pros and the instructors and like those guys were there. So, you know, Danaher, Sean Williams, like the Sarahs, you know, they would come in and teach in the afternoon, but they would train at night. And also at night, it was, you know, Rodrigo Gracie, Daniel Gracie, Renzo was teaching and training. Ricardo Almeida was there. If people were guests, and, you know, like having a guest who would come from Brazil at the time was like, that was like, you know, oh my God, it was like, you know, it was like, you know, the second coming. It was like, you know, everybody like put out an alert. It's like, you know, someone from Brazil is coming. People were like, oh, who is it? And they were like, we don't know, but
we don't know,
you know,
but
it's someone's coming, you know. But, you know, like it was like, you know, Nino Shembri, Hodger, like these guys would come to the night classes.
Yeah.
And so the daytime guys, and it was mostly guys, you know, the daytime guys were like, you know, like the second stringers. You know, we weren't really like the real guys. And so there was like a looseness, I think, to that. And, you know, like Thomas, you were asking about this before. We were talking about like goals and stuff. I think that in the evening times, I think that people's like goals and objectives for like a career path in jiu-jitsu, such as it was at the time, was much more clearly defined. Like you had people at the time, this was like around the time this is like going like practically ancient history now, but like Sakuraba was like the big kind of threat to the Gracie name at the time. And it was that
Mm-hmm.
around that time when it was just before they did the Bushido, Pride Bushido, when
Mm-hmm.
like all the Gracies went to Japan and like fought all the Japanese fighters. Like it was leading up to that. So, if you were coming to the nighttime classes, your career path was probably MMA. And it was either MMA Pride or like Ricardo and Matt Serra were, UFC bound. And at the time, again, UFC was like this
Yeah.
weird hybrid of like a backyard fight and like, I don't know, like amateur boxing. So this is kind of a long answer, but like in the training day to day, there was a sense of people being like so far outside of your grasp, like so far outside of your reach in terms of their skills that they were like gods. But at the same time, they were very relatable. And the whole experience, because we were there during the day, was much more of kind of like a laboratory than it was like a finishing school.
Mm-hmm.
Which is how I kind of thought. I would go to the nighttime classes from time to time. I wasn't able to because my work schedule at the time, I was working in the evening, and so I was training during the day. But that was kind of how it was. And yeah, I think that it was a matter of luck, timing, and kind of. Also, the only other thing I'll say, and I think this is kind of for people who are listening now, there was a set, in spite of my like weird, like hippie, like-ness, like I was somewhere between like homeless and like a hippie. Like if you see pictures, like there are some pictures of me like back then, it's like, what, like what's going on? But,
We didn't want to
you
bring
know,
this up, but
yeah. No, I know. They're out there. I've done my best to suppress them, but like there's like one or two floating around. But like I think that there was something about my temperament and like the way that I came into jiu-jitsu and like the room where I wasn't. I was kind of put off by some of it, but I wasn't like that wasn't a struggle for me. Like being like kind of Gary, like what we were talking about, like my being bad at jiu-jitsu was not the problem.
Mhm.
Like that didn't phase me. Like I knew that I was bad. Like I knew that I didn't know anything. I knew that I was smaller than everyone. I knew that I was, weaker. I knew I was going to get crushed. Like that was not the issue. I didn't want to get hurt. I didn't want to get like, broken.
Right.
But the fact that like I couldn't get out of the mount, or like I got submitted 800 times, a day, I was still kind of open to the experience of trying to learn whatever was going on here. And that, I think, was a big factor in sticking around, and also being willing to learn from these guys who I knew like had forgotten more jiu-jitsu than I would ever learn, which I still think is probably the case.
Yeah, it is a perishable skill.
Would it have been the same if your availability was only the night class?
I think about that sometimes. Honestly, like I think it would have been different.
Yeah.
I think it would have been different. I think that I'm not, like I was telling you guys, like I'm not really like a team sports guy. I'm not a joiner in that way. And I'm not like, like, "Hey, let's go, let's go, everybody, like,
So-
kind of get in the scrum and like,
So in some
join.
in some
Yeah,
sense,
like,
right place, right time.
Yeah, like join the mob. But like
Sure.
I do think I think it would have been different. And the other thing is, I think that you just don't know how things are going to turn out.
Yeah.
No matter what it is. It's like you look at something, and I think this is an important lesson in, this is a jiu-jitsu lesson, Thomas, we were talking about, these lessons that show up in the classroom that end up heading, you carry them off the mat with you. It's like you just don't know how stuff is going to turn out, because if you look at it on paper back then, you'd look at it and you'd be like, all right, here's, would you rather be in this kind of like second string class
Right.
that was taught by two purple belts, or would you rather be in this like A-level class that's being run by, like the best black belts, in MMA and no-gi jiu-jitsu, and like Renzo's a legend. Like, wouldn't you rather be with him every chance you got than this weirdo kind of like philosophy major who's a purple belt
Yeah.
who only wants to do ankle locks? It's like, well, I mean, obviously on paper, there's no choice, but because you don't see all the factors, and sometimes it's not enough to go with how you think things might possibly turn out. You just don't know. And I think it's an argument for like there are limits to control. As much as jiu-jitsu is about, jiu-jitsu is the science of control leading to submission. There is a degree to which control is an illusion. There's only so much you can muster. So
Yeah, for sure. As we go through this conversation, I feel like deeper we go into it, more we discover, and more I want to ask you, more I want to pick your brain, and time is running out. And
yeah.
at some point, we got to wrap this up here. But before we finish this off, what we do at the end of every episode, we have a question for you from our previous guest. But he didn't know that you're going to be answering it. So think of it as question and blind, completely.
Sure.
Blindsided. And Gary's going to take a lead on this, but I think this is going to turn into an interesting end of this conversation.
Yeah, so this is from Paulo Guillobel, and he wanted to know, what direction is your jiu-jitsu taking considering your age and your rank?
I don't know. In a way, I'm a student of my teacher. So, I follow his lead, and I think that I'm committed to being a student for as long as I can be, and to whatever extent I can be. And tying into this, what we were talking about, it's hard to say. I don't know where my jiu-jitsu is going in a way. I think that there are certainly skills that I'm still developing because they're not quite where I would like them to be. And because jiu-jitsu itself, like mastery, is a moving target. And since we can never really hit it, we're always covering the gap between where we are and where we want to be. And as jiu-jitsu changes and evolves, I think it's incumbent on everybody who's a practitioner to keep pace at whatever level they're able to with what's going on. So, for instance, when we talk about what jiu-jitsu looked like 15 years ago versus what jiu-jitsu looked like 7.5 years ago. 15 years ago, some people did leg locks, no-gi, some people didn't. 7.5 years ago, if you weren't starting to do leg locks, you were kind of falling behind. Now, if you don't know what a leg entanglement is, and I'm not saying you need to be an expert, but like if you don't know what that is, you're gonna feel like there's a big part of jiu-jitsu that you don't understand, that you don't know. And as a result, like I think that we have to be adjusting because we want to be able to, as much as possible, close the gaps in our knowledge as practitioners. Not only that, but the effort of closing the gap is the work of jiu-jitsu practice, and it's the sort of thing that doesn't go out of style, and you don't age out of it, and you don't like rank out of it. There isn't a sense of like there isn't a sense of, okay, we're arriving at a point where like I've kind of got it all down, and basically I'm just kind of polishing the elements. I mean, maybe there are some people out there who feel like that. I feel like there's some stuff on a good day that I get to polish, but most of the time I'm like, hey, the thing that's keeping me engaged in the process, the thing that you hear people talk about this, like kind of the white belt mind, like the white belt mindset, the beginner's mind. Like the thing that keeps us engaged and kind of keeps us young in jiu-jitsu, even if you're chronologically old, the thing that keeps you young in jiu-jitsu is by going like, hey, well, there are always some things to work on, and you work on those to whatever capacity you have. You may not be able to, is a classic one is like, you may not be able to invert. Okay, you're 48 years old and your body doesn't fold in half. And you look at guys who are competitors who are 23 years old and their body folds in half like there's no spine. Well, that's not, like, measuring yourself against someone like that is doing yourself a disservice. That's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about is, what about that can you extract and build into your practice so that you remain active? I don't necessarily like the phrase relevant, but like I think that that's something that people kind of do relate to. And there are plenty of things, for instance, that plenty of like elements of late stage leg lock defense that I'm still developing. I'm still working on that. There are plenty of like late stage back attack stuff that I feel like, I have like a pretty good general sense of this, but like in terms of mastery of it, I'm like, no, I'm still like first couple steps on the road. So again, I think that all of this stuff is a moving target. And if you're going to be a jiu-jitsu practitioner, then you need to be willing to move with the target. And it doesn't need to be a sense of you're lacking something, like you suck more because you don't have this. I think especially for practitioners who are 40 and over, it's more about working on skill acquisition, developing abilities in areas that you're not that confident in, or like things that you've tried but you haven't quite closed the gap on yet. That's the practice. And I think the further, the more, it doesn't really have to do with being competitive. It doesn't really have to do with how you're ranking in like IBJJF Masters. I think it has much more to do with this intrinsic experience of like, hey, I'm doing jiu-jitsu, I'm training jiu-jitsu. These are the things that I look around and I'm not quite good at them yet. I don't, maybe you feel like I'm good at them. I don't feel like that. Maybe you feel like I suck at them. I might agree, but I'm working on them. And then for me personally, at this stage, I use my instructor as a true north, because so far so good. He hasn't really steered me wrong, and it's been almost 25 years. So I don't know where it's going, but I kind of like my chances of continuing.
I mean, good for you. That's number one. But I think that's one of the more misunderstood parts of jiu-jitsu. And oftentimes this is where students, unfortunately, look in the other directions, and they try to have these fixed points of reference and these unrealistic goals, comparing themselves to other students who are right next to them. Right. Instead of really exploring this learning opportunity with the target we'll never achieve. And I feel the sooner we come to that agreement, more successful we will be. And I wish more had that train of thoughts, especially at the beginning of their journey.
Well, we're working on it. I mean, I think you guys are. Your podcast is helping. So
yeah, no, listen. We appreciate your time. I mean, this has been over an hour. of nothing but great thoughts, great stories, great philosophy. So I really appreciate your time and the opportunity to pick your brain on some of those deep topics, because we touched on some deep things. So thank you for being here. If anybody wants to reach out to you, are you available on social media? Where can they find you? Is it not like, I mean, somebody had to be living under a rock not to know, but if any.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much, and thanks for setting this up. It's a pleasure to be here and to have a chance to talk with you. Yeah, I'm on Instagram. My Instagram is bzglick. So I try to respond. If I get messages, I try to be pretty active there. So answering questions and kind of connecting with people through that. I have a YouTube channel as well, which I think is also at bzglick. But if you just search my name in YouTube, there are some videos there. And then teaching, I have a couple of instructionals through BJJ Fanatics as well, and maybe those will be in the show notes, and some other links in the show notes for people who want to reach out or find out more.
Yeah, and we'll definitely put all the links in the show notes, as we always do. So making it accessible for everybody to connect with you if that's the desire. Brian, once again, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for your time. And continue doing what you're doing, because without people like you, Jiu-Jitsu would not be the same what we have today. And I'm looking forward to the future. Gary?
Yeah, just ditto. We know you got to go, so I'll keep it short. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to RŌL Radio. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review and help us make the show even more amazing. For future episodes, check out our website and follow us on all major podcast platforms. Take care.